The carriage door slammed shut behind her. No turning back now. Elara Whitcomb stood in the rain, staring up at the iron gates of Ashford Manor, her heart hammering against her ribs. Behind her lay a forced marriage to a monster. Ahead, a gamble with a man they called cursed. His first wife had died here. Fell, they said, or was pushed. She'd made her choice. Better the devil you negotiate with than the one who owns you. The gates groaned open. Somewhere inside that stone fortress, the Duke waited, and Elara had just walked into a trap she couldn't see yet. If you want to know whether she survives what's coming, stay until the end. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The rain hadn't stopped for 3 days. It came down in sheets, turning the London streets into rivers of mud and misery, and Elara Whitcomb sat in the corner of her late father's study, watching the water run down the window panes like tears the house was crying for him. He'd been gone 2 weeks. 14 days since the fever took him. 14 days since everything she knew turned to smoke. You're being unreasonable. Elara didn't look up. Her guardian, Thomas Greaves, stood by the fireplace, his back to the flames, his face carved from stone and spite. He was her father's half-brother, a man who'd spent decades envying what he couldn't have, and now, finally, held all the cards. I'm being realistic, she said quietly. I won't marry him. You don't have a choice. There's always a choice. Thomas laughed. It wasn't a pleasant sound. Is there? Let me paint the picture for you, niece. You're 23, unmarried. Your father left debts, more than you know. The estate is entailed. The moment probate clears, it goes to a cousin in Yorkshire who's never set foot here. You have no income, no property, and no prospects except what I arrange for you. He leaned forward, his voice dropping. Lord Chadwick has generously offered his hand. You'll accept. Elara's stomach turned. Lord Chadwick was 60 if he was a day, with 2 dead wives behind him and a reputation that made servants quit without notice. Generously offered, she repeated, her voice flat. What did you promise him? That's not your concern. He's buying me. What's the price? Thomas's jaw tightened. You'll marry him in a month. The arrangements are made. Then unmake them. Elara. He crossed the room in 3 strides, looming over her chair. You're out of options. Your father spoiled you, let you read, think, pretend you had some say in your own life. That's done. You're a woman with no protection and no fortune. Chadwick is your future. Accept it with grace, or I'll drag you to the altar myself. She looked up at him then, met his eyes without flinching. No. For a moment she thought he might strike her. His hand twitched, but he pulled back, his face mottling red. 1 month, he said. I'll hear no more argument. He left. The door slammed hard enough to rattle the inkwells on the desk. Elara sat there, her hands fisted in her skirts, her mind racing. He was right about one thing. She had no money, no allies, no leverage. Her father's friends had melted away the moment he died. Too busy, too distant, too conveniently unavailable to help the orphaned daughter of a man who'd been kind but never powerful. But Thomas was wrong about the rest. She wasn't out of options. She just had to pick the least terrible one. The idea came to her at 2 a.m, when the rain finally stopped and the house settled into silence. She'd been lying awake, staring at the ceiling, turning possibilities over in her mind like stones. Running away? With what money? Becoming a governess? No references. Throwing herself on the mercy of distant relatives? They'd send her straight back to Thomas. Then she remembered the name people whispered in drawing rooms when they thought young ladies weren't listening. Duke Rowan Ashford. The papers had called it a tragedy. His wife, young, beautiful, vibrant, had fallen from the cliffs behind their estate. An accident, the inquest said. But the whispers told a different story. They said she'd been terrified of him, said she'd tried to leave twice and been dragged back, said the Duke was cold, controlling, dangerous, said he'd driven her to jump. It was gossip, probably. The kind of poison the bored and wealthy spread because they had nothing better to do. But Elara didn't need the truth. She needed leverage. A widower, reclusive, notorious, living alone in a crumbling estate on the coast, shunned by society. A man who might, just might, be desperate enough to accept an unconventional proposal. What? She found his address in her father's old correspondence. Ashford Manor, perched on the cliffs of Cornwall, miles from anywhere that mattered. It took her 4 days to arrange the trip, selling jewelry piece by piece to pay for passage, lying to the housekeeper about visiting an old school friend. Thomas didn't notice. He was too busy finalizing the wedding contract. The train journey was endless. The hired carriage from the station rattled over rutted roads, through villages that looked like they'd been carved out of granite and spite. The driver wouldn't take her all the way. "Ashford Land starts at the gates," he said, his face grim. "I don't go past that." "Why not?" "Just don't." She paid him and walked. The gates were iron, 10 feet tall, wrapped in ivy that looked like it was strangling them. Beyond, the road stretched toward the sea, disappearing into mist. Elara pushed the gates open. They groaned like something dying. The house appeared slowly, first just a shadow in the fog, then a shape, then a full Gothic nightmare of stone and towers and narrow windows that looked like eyes. It sat on the edge of the cliff, daring the ocean to come closer. She stopped at the base of the steps, her courage wavering. This was insane. She was about to walk up to a man she'd never met, a man half of England thought was a murderer, and propose marriage. But behind her was Chadwick. Ahead was a gamble. She climbed the steps, knocked. Silence. She knocked again, harder. The door opened. A woman stood there, housekeeper by the look of her, gaunt and gray and unsmiling. "We're not receiving visitors. I need to speak with the Duke." "He doesn't see anyone." "Tell him Elara Whitcomb is here. Tell him I have a proposal that benefits us both." The housekeeper's eyes narrowed. "Miss, you should leave." "I can't." Elara's voice cracked despite herself. "Please. 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking." Something shifted in the woman's face. Not sympathy exactly, but maybe recognition of desperation. "Wait here." She closed the door. Elara stood on the steps, shivering, her dress soaked through from the mist. 10 minutes passed. Then the door opened again. "Come in. Wipe your feet." The entrance hall was vast and dark, all wood paneling and portraits of stern-faced ancestors. A fire burned in a grate the size of a small room, but it did nothing to cut the cold. "Follow me?" The housekeeper led her down a corridor lined with closed doors. Their footsteps echoed. Elara's heart was beating so hard she thought it might crack a rib. They stopped at a door near the back of the house. The housekeeper knocked once, then opened it. "The young lady, Your Grace." Elara stepped inside. The room was a study, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, a massive oak desk, windows overlooking the cliffs and the churning sea beyond. A man stood with his back to her, silhouetted against the gray light. "You have 5 minutes," he said without turning around. His voice was low, clipped, utterly devoid of warmth. "Speak." Elara swallowed. "My name is Elara Whitcomb. My father recently passed. I'm currently under the guardianship of a man who intends to force me into marriage with Lord Chadwick, a man 3 times my age with a history I won't detail, but which you can imagine. I have no fortune, no family willing to help, and no legal avenue to refuse." She paused. "I need protection. You need respectability. I'm proposing a marriage of convenience, in name only. You gain a duchess, which might quiet some of the talk. I gain a name and legal standing that my guardian can't touch." Silence. The Duke turned around. Elara had expected someone older, hardened, monstrous even, given the stories. Rowan Ashford was none of those things. He was tall, broad-shouldered, probably in his early 30s. Dark hair, gray eyes that looked like the sea outside, cold and impossible to read. His face was handsome in a sharp, almost cruel way, all angles and shadows. He wore black, head to toe, like he was still in mourning. He studied her for a long moment, his expression giving away nothing. "You're serious," he said finally. "Completely. You realize what people say about me?" "I do." "And you came anyway." "I'm out of options. You're the least terrible one." Something flickered in his eyes. Amusement? Contempt? She couldn't tell. "Why would I agree to this?" Elara lifted her chin. "Because you're rotting out here. Whatever happened to your wife, guilty or not, you've let the rumors bury you. You don't go to London. You don't see anyone. You're a duke with lands and a title, and you're living like a prisoner. I won't ask questions about the past. I won't demand anything beyond what we agree to. But I'll be visible. I'll host dinners if you want or not. I'll give you cover. And in return, I get to live my life without being sold to the highest bidder. His jaw tightened. That's a bold pitch from someone standing in my house uninvited. I knocked. Barely. Do you want to hear the rest or not? He crossed his arms. Go on. I won't interfere with your life. Separate rooms, separate routines. We'll present a united front in public if necessary, but otherwise we're strangers who share a name. When enough time has passed and it's socially acceptable, we can quietly separate. Divorce if we must. But for now, we both get what we need. And what happens when you get bored of this arrangement? When you decide you want more? I won't. Everyone wants more. Not me. Her voice hardened. I watched my father lose everything chasing more. I've seen what wanting more does to people. I don't need love. I don't need passion. I need freedom. That's all. Rowan stared at her, his expression unreadable. You're either very brave or very stupid, he said. Probably both. He almost smiled. Almost. Then he turned back to the window. Leave your address with Mrs. Calloway. I'll send word in a week. That's not a week. His tone left no room for argument. If I agree, the wedding will be immediate and private. No announcement, no guests, no fuss. You'll move here the same day. If you have conditions, write them down and send them with your address. Elara's breath caught. He was considering it, actually considering it. Thank you, she managed. Don't thank me yet. Mrs. Calloway appeared in the doorway, as if summoned by telepathy. This way, miss. Elara followed her out, her legs shaking. She'd done it. She'd walked into the lion's den and made her pitch. Now she just had to wait and see if the lion was hungry enough to say yes. The letter arrived 6 days later. Elara opened it in her room, her hands trembling. Miss Whitcomb, I accept your proposal. A carriage will arrive at your residence on the 14th at dawn. Bring only what you can carry. The ceremony will take place at Ashford Manor the same day. Your guardian will be notified after the fact. R. Ashford. No warmth, no reassurance, just cold, hard facts. Elara folded the letter and pressed it to her chest, her heart pounding. She'd done it. She'd escaped Chadwick. But as she sat there, listening to the house creak around her, a new fear took root. She'd traded one cage for another, and this time, she had no idea what was waiting inside. The morning of the 14th came too fast. Elara woke before dawn, dressed in her simplest gown, dark blue wool, high-necked, practical. She packed a single trunk, clothes, a few books, her mother's jewelry, and the last letter her father had written her before he got sick. Everything else, the house, the furniture, the life she'd known, she left behind. Thomas was still asleep when the carriage arrived. She walked out the front door without looking back. The driver didn't speak. The journey was long, cold, and silent. Elara watched the countryside roll past, her mind numb. By the time they reached Ashford Land, the sun was setting again, painting the cliffs in shades of blood and gold. The gates groaned open. The house loomed. Mrs. Calloway met her at the door. This way, miss. The Duke is waiting. They walked to a small chapel attached to the east wing. Inside, a vicar stood by the altar, looking uncomfortable. Rowan stood beside him, hands clasped behind his back, his face a mask. Miss Whitcomb, he said. No greeting, no warmth. Your Grace. The ceremony lasted 10 minutes. No vows, no rings, just legal words spoken quickly, witnessed by Mrs. Calloway and a silent manservant. When it was done, the vicar fled. Rowan turned to her. Your rooms are in the west wing. Mrs. Calloway will show you. We take meals separately unless there's a reason to do otherwise. The library is open to you. The east wing is not. If you need anything, ask the staff. And you? Elara asked. What are your routines? You'll rarely see me. That's the point. He walked away. Elara stood there, legally married, utterly alone. Mrs. Calloway touched her elbow. Come along, Your Grace. Your Grace. The title felt like a joke. Her rooms were large, well-furnished, and suffocatingly quiet. A bedroom, a sitting room, a view of the cliffs, and the sea crashing below. Dinner at 7, Mrs. Calloway said. In your rooms, unless His Grace requests otherwise. Does he often request otherwise? No? The door closed. Elara sat on the edge of the bed, her hands folded in her lap. She'd escaped Thomas, escaped Chadwick, but the silence here was louder than anything she'd left behind. And somewhere in this house, her new husband was hiding from her. Or hiding something. The first week passed in eerie stillness. Elara saw Rowan exactly twice, once in passing in the corridor. He nodded, she nodded, neither spoke. And once at a distance through a window, walking the cliffs alone, his coat whipping in the wind. The staff was polite but distant. Mrs. Calloway, the housekeeper, ran the house with iron efficiency. There was a cook, an older woman named Bess who didn't smile, a handful of maids who wouldn't meet Elara's eyes, a groundskeeper she never saw. No one talked. Elara spent her days in the library. It was vast, 2 stories of shelves crammed with books on everything from botany to philosophy. She read to keep from going mad. But at night, the house came alive. Footsteps in the corridor, doors closing, whispers she couldn't quite make out. And once, just once, a scream. She bolted upright in bed, her heart hammering. It came again, high, thin, full of terror. Then silence. She grabbed a candle and ran into the hall. Nothing. No one. "Mrs. Calloway," she called. A door opened at the far end. Mrs. Calloway appeared, fully dressed despite the hour. "Yes, Your Grace?" "I heard. Did you hear that?" "Hear what?" "A scream." Mrs. Calloway's face didn't change. "The wind off the cliffs plays tricks. You'll get used to it." "That wasn't wind." "I assure you, Your Grace, everyone is accounted for. Go back to bed." She closed the door. Elara stood there, the candle flickering. That wasn't wind, and Mrs. Calloway was lying. Him? The next morning, Elara went looking. The house was a maze. Corridors that doubled back, staircases that led nowhere, rooms that seemed to serve no purpose. She mapped it in her head as she walked, trying to make sense of the layout. The east wing was locked. Every door. She tried the handles anyway. "Your Grace." She spun. Rowan stood at the end of the corridor, his expression thunderous. "I told you the east wing is off limits. I was exploring. Explore somewhere else. Why is it locked?" "Because I said so." "That's not an answer." His jaw tightened. "You agreed to certain terms. One of them was respecting my privacy." "I'm not asking to see your diary. I'm asking why an entire wing of the house is sealed off." "It's not your concern." "I live here now. That makes it my concern." He crossed the distance between them in 3 strides, stopping close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. "Let me be very clear, Elara. You're here because we made a deal. That deal does not include interrogating me or poking around where you don't belong. The east wing is mine. Stay out of it." She should have backed down, should have nodded and walked away. Instead, she held his gaze. "What are you hiding?" Something flashed in his eyes. Anger, maybe, or fear. "Nothing you need to know about." He turned and walked away. Elara stood there, her pulse racing. She'd poked the bear, and now she couldn't stop wondering why he'd reacted like that. What was in the east wing, and why was he so desperate to keep her away from it? "Man." That night she heard the footsteps again. Slow, deliberate. Right outside her door, she sat up, barely breathing. The footsteps stopped. Then the door handle turned. Elara's heart slammed into her throat. The door didn't open. She'd locked it, but someone was trying. "Who's there?" she called, her voice shaking. The handle stopped moving. Silence. Then the footsteps retreated. Elara didn't sleep the rest of the night. In the morning, she confronted Mrs. Calloway. "Someone tried to enter my room last night." "I'm sure you're mistaken, Your Grace." "I'm not." "Someone turned the handle." Mrs. Calloway's face was stone. "Perhaps you were dreaming." "I wasn't." "Then perhaps you're not adjusting well. This house can be unsettling for newcomers." "That's not—" "I'll have tea sent to your rooms." She turned away. "Mrs. Calloway." The housekeeper paused. "What happened to the first Duchess?" The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Mrs. Calloway's back stiffened. "That's not a subject for discussion." "She died here." "She fell." "Did she?" Mrs. Calloway turned slowly, Her face was pale, her eyes hard. "You should be very careful, Your Grace. This house has a way of breaking those who ask too many questions." She walked out. Elara stood there, her skin crawling. This wasn't grief. This wasn't a household in mourning. This was fear, and she was standing in the middle of it. She went back to the library, found the local newspapers from 2 years ago, read every article about the death of Duchess Catherine Ashford. The story was thin. She'd fallen from the cliffs during a walk. Her body had been found on the rocks below. The inquest ruled it accidental. The Duke had been questioned but cleared of suspicion. But the tone of the articles was off. Little insinuations, phrasing that suggested doubt without outright accusation. The Duke, who rarely left the estate. The Duchess, who had been seen in distress. No witnesses to the fall itself. Elara closed the papers, her mind spinning. Catherine Ashford had died under suspicious circumstances, and Rowan had locked away the part of the house where it happened. She should leave this alone, but she couldn't, because if something was still wrong here, if there was still danger in this house, she'd walked right into it. And this time, she had nowhere to run. But that evening, she skipped dinner. Instead, she waited until the house was quiet, then slipped into the corridor. The east wing was still locked, but she'd noticed something earlier, a servant's staircase at the back of the house, narrow and steep, probably used decades ago when estates ran on rigid class divisions. She found it, climbed. At the top, a door, unlocked. She pushed it open. The east wing. The air was colder here, stale, like no one had opened a window in years. She moved slowly, her candle throwing long shadows. The first room was a bedroom, dust-covered furniture, curtains drawn. Nothing unusual. The second was a sitting room, same story. The third? She stopped. It was another bedroom, but this one was different. The furniture was overturned, scratches on the walls, a mirror, shattered. And on the floor, near the window, bloodstains, old, faded, but unmistakable. Elara's breath caught. This was where Catherine died, or where something happened to her before she fell. "You shouldn't be here." She spun. Rowan stood in the doorway, his face carved from ice. "I told you to stay out." "What happened in this room? Leave. Now." "There's blood on the floor. Leave." His voice cracked like a whip. But Elara didn't move. "Did you hurt her?" she asked quietly. The question hung in the air like smoke. Rowan's expression shifted, something raw and broken flickering beneath the cold. "No," he said. "But everyone thinks I did. Including you, apparently." "Then tell me what happened." "Why? So you can decide whether to run? You're already trapped here, Elara. You made your deal." "I'm asking," she said, her voice steady, "because if there's danger in this house, I need to know." He stared at her for a long moment. Then he turned away. "Come with me." She followed him down the corridor, her heart pounding, into a small sitting room she hadn't found before. He closed the door, poured himself a drink, didn't offer her one. "Catherine didn't fall," he said finally. "She jumped." Elara's stomach dropped. "She was sick," Rowan continued, his voice flat. "Not physically, mentally. She heard things that weren't there, saw things, became convinced the house was trying to kill her. I tried to help, brought in doctors, specialists. Nothing worked. She got worse, started locking herself in rooms, refusing to eat. And then one night, she ran. I found her on the cliffs. She was—" He stopped. "She was screaming about shadows, about something in the house. I tried to bring her back inside. She fought me. And then she—" He didn't finish. "She jumped," Elara said softly. "Yes. And everyone thinks you pushed her." "Yes." "Why didn't you fight the rumors?" "What's the point? They'd already decided." He drained his glass. "I locked the east wing because I couldn't stand to look at it. Because every time I walked past that room, I saw her, heard her, and I couldn't—" His voice broke. "I couldn't save her." Elara stood there, her mind reeling. He wasn't a murderer. He was a man drowning in guilt. "I'm sorry," she said. He laughed bitterly. "You shouldn't be. You should get as far from here as you can." "Why?" "Because maybe she was right. Maybe there is something wrong with this house. Elara's skin prickled. You don't believe that. I don't know what I believe anymore. He walked out. Elara stayed in the sitting room, staring at the empty glass he'd left behind. She'd come here for safety, but she'd walked into a haunted house. And she was starting to think the ghost wasn't done yet. The house felt different after that conversation. Not safer, not warmer, just known. The shadows were still there, the locked doors, the whispers in the hallway. But now Elara understood what she was dealing with. Not a murderer. A man buried under guilt so heavy it had turned him into stone. And maybe, just maybe, a house that had seen something terrible. She didn't sleep well that night. Every creak made her jump. Every shift of wind against the windows sounded like breathing. By the time dawn broke, she was exhausted and wired at the same time, her mind racing with questions she didn't have answers to. She dressed quickly and went downstairs. Rowan was in the dining room reading a newspaper, a cup of black coffee untouched at his elbow. He didn't look up when she entered. I thought we ate separately, she said. We do? Then what are you doing here? I live here. Elara crossed her arms. Are we going to do this every morning? Trade barbs like children? He folded the paper with exaggerated care. What do you want, Elara? Answers. I gave you answers last night. Not enough. She pulled out a chair and sat across from him, uninvited. You said Catherine was sick, that she heard things, saw things. But you also said you brought in doctors. What did they say? Rowan's jaw tightened, that she was hysterical, suffering from nervous strain. They recommended rest, tonics, isolation. Isolation? Their word, not mine. And did it help? What do you think? Elara leaned forward. I think locking someone away when they're terrified is the worst thing you can do. I think it probably made her worse. His eyes snapped to hers, sharp and cold. I didn't lock her away. I tried everything. She wouldn't eat, wouldn't sleep. She kept saying the walls were moving, that something was watching her. The doctor said it was madness. What was I supposed to do? Believe her. The words hung between them like a blade. Rowan stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. You don't know what you're talking about. Then explain it to me. Why? So you can judge me? Decide I failed her? I already know I did. He walked out. Elara sat there, her heart pounding. She'd pushed too hard, but she couldn't stop. Because the more she learned, the more convinced she became that Catherine's death wasn't just grief or madness. It was something else, and whatever it was still here. She spent the morning in the library again, pulling books on the history of the estate. Ashford Manor had been built in the 1600s by a minor lord who'd made his fortune in trade. Sugar, mostly, which meant slaves, though the books glossed over that part with the usual polite euphemisms. The house had passed through several hands before landing with the Ashford family in the late 1700s. Nothing unusual. No curses, no legends, no bloody history that would explain Catherine's terror. But then she found a journal tucked between two volumes on architecture. Thin, leather-bound, the pages yellowed with age. No name on the cover. She opened it carefully. The handwriting was hurried, barely legible in places. March 12th. The sound again last night, like something scraping against the walls. Thomas says it's mice, but mice don't sound like that. I told him I wanted to leave. He laughed. March 20th. I saw it today. Just for a moment. A shadow in the corridor too tall to be human. I tried to follow, but it was gone. I'm not imagining this. I know I'm not. April 3rd. Thomas has locked me in the East Wing. He says it's for my own good, that I'm unwell. But I know what I saw. I know what's in this house. He won't listen. No one will. April 10th. I can't stay here. I won't. The journal ended there. Elara's hands were shaking. The handwriting was different from the printed labels on the spine, but the tone, the desperation, the fear, it was identical to what Rowan had described about Catherine. She flipped to the inside cover. A name, faded but still visible. Margaret Ashford, 1823. Rowan's great-great-grandmother, maybe. Or some distant relative. But that didn't matter. What mattered was that this had happened before. A woman. Terrified. seeing things, dismissed as mad, and then Elara snapped the journal shut. She needed to talk to Rowan. She found him outside, walking the cliffs. The wind was brutal, whipping his coat around his legs, but he didn't seem to notice. He stood near the edge, staring down at the rocks where Catherine had died. Elara approached carefully, her boots crunching on the gravel path. "You're going to fall if you stand that close," she said. He didn't turn. "I've been standing here for 2 years, haven't fallen yet. That's not reassuring." He glanced at her. "What do you want now?" She held up the journal. "I found this. In the library." "I don't care about old books." "You should care about this one." She opened it to the last entry and read it aloud. When she finished, the color had drained from his face. "Where did you find that?" "Between 2 architecture books. It's dated 1823. A woman named Margaret Ashford." "Margaret." He said the name like it hurt. "That was my great-great-aunt. She died in the East Wing, threw herself from the window." Elara's stomach turned. Was she sick too?" "According to family records, yes. They called it melancholia. Said she was prone to fits." He took the journal from her, his hands unsteady. "I didn't know she'd written this." "Rowan, this is the same thing that happened to Catherine. The same fears, the same descriptions. What if what? There's a ghost?" His voice was harsh. "That's insane." "Is it? You said it yourself last night. You said maybe Catherine was right. Maybe there is something wrong with this house." "I was drunk and grieving. I didn't mean—" "Then explain this." Elara gestured at the journal. 2 women, 100 years apart, describing the exact same thing, both dismissed as mad, both dead. Rowan stared at the journal, his jaw working. "Even if I believed you," he said slowly, "what do you want me to do about it? Hire a priest? Burn the house down? I want you to help me figure out what's happening before it happens again. It's not going to happen again. Catherine's gone. Margaret's gone. There's no one left to—" He stopped, his eyes widening. "You." "What?" "You're living in the house now, sleeping in the West Wing. If there's something here, if it's real, you're next." Elara's skin went cold. She hadn't thought about that. "Then we need to find out what it is," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Because I'm not running, and I'm not jumping off a cliff." Rowan looked at her like she'd lost her mind. "You're serious. Completely. This is a mistake." "Probably. But I'm making it anyway." He exhaled sharply, shaking his head. "You're going to get yourself killed." "Not if you help me." For a long moment he said nothing. The wind howled around them, carrying the smell of salt and decay. Then he folded the journal and handed it back. "Fine. But we do this carefully. No more sneaking around. No more locked doors. If we're going to investigate, we do it together." Elara nodded. "Agreed. And if we find nothing, you drop this. Understand? If we find nothing, I'll drop it." He held out his hand. She shook it. And just like that, they were partners. Shuts. They started in the East Wing. Rowan unlocked the doors one by one, his face tight. Elara walked beside him, a candle in hand even though it was midday. The light felt necessary. The first few rooms were empty, dusty furniture, yellowed wallpaper, the smell of disuse. But then they reached the room where Elara had found the bloodstains. Rowan stopped in the doorway, his face pale. "This was Catherine's room," he said quietly, "before she started locking herself in the other one. What happened here?" "I don't know. I came in one morning and found it like this. Furniture overturned, mirror broken. She was sitting in the corner screaming. She wouldn't tell me what she'd seen." He swallowed. "That was the day I brought in the last doctor, the one who said she needed to be committed." "Did you consider it?" "Yes." His voice cracked. "I hated myself for it, but I didn't know what else to do." Elara stepped into the room, her eyes scanning the walls. The scratches she'd seen before were deeper than she'd realized, long, jagged gouges that looked like someone had clawed at the plaster in desperation. "Rowan, look at this." He joined her. She pointed at the scratches. "Those aren't random," she said. "They're words." He leaned closer, carved into the wall, barely visible under layers of dust and damage. "Get out." Rowan's breath hitched. "She wrote that," Elara said softly. "Or someone did." She was warning me. His voice was raw. She was trying to tell me to leave and I didn't listen. Or she was warning herself. Elara moved to the window, the one that overlooked the cliffs. The glass was intact, but the frame was warped, like it had been forced open repeatedly. This is where Margaret died too, isn't it? Rowan nodded. Same room, different window, but yes. Then this room is the center of it. Whatever's happening, it starts here. Or it's just a coincidence. Two women with mental illness drawn to the same space. Elara turned to face him. Do you really believe that? He didn't answer. She crossed to the far wall and started pressing against the panels. Help me. Help you what? Old houses have hidden spaces. Priest holes, servant corridors, storage. If something's been scaring people in this room, maybe it's coming from inside the walls. Rowan hesitated, then joined her. They worked in silence, tapping, pressing, listening for hollow spots. Elara's hands were filthy within minutes, her dress streaked with dust. And then, a panel shifted. Here, she breathed. Rowan pushed harder. The panel swung inward with a groan, revealing a narrow passage behind the wall. Cold air rushed out, carrying the smell of mold and something else, something sharp and chemical. Elara grabbed her candle and stepped inside. Wait, Rowan caught her arm. Let me go first. We go together. He didn't argue. The passage was tight, the walls pressing close. It ran parallel to the room for a few feet, then angled downward, stairs, steep and uneven, descending into darkness. Elara's candle flickered. Where does this go? She whispered. I don't know. I've lived here my whole life and I've never seen this. They descended carefully. The air grew colder with every step. At the bottom, the passage opened into a small chamber, more of a cellar, really, carved out of the rock beneath the house. And in the center of the room sat a table. On it, bottles, vials, syringes, papers covered in cramped handwriting. Elara picked up one of the bottles. The label was faded, but she could make out the word laudanum. Rowan. He was staring at the papers, his face gray. What is it? He handed her one. It was a letter, addressed to someone named Dr. Nathaniel Greaves. The doses you've provided are working perfectly. The Duchess grows more pliable each day. Another month and she'll be entirely dependent. Once the will is changed, we can proceed with the final stage. Elara's blood turned to ice. Greaves, she said slowly. That's my guardian's name. Rowan looked at her sharply. What? Thomas Greaves. He's my father's half-brother. He's the one who tried to force me into marriage. Is he related to this Nathaniel? I don't know. Maybe. Probably. Her mind was racing. If this doctor was drugging Catherine, making her think she was going mad, then she wasn't sick. Rowan's voice was barely a whisper. She was being poisoned. The candle guttered, and from somewhere above them, in the house, a door slammed. Tuck-it. They ran. Up the stairs, through the passage, back into Catherine's room. Rowan slammed the panel shut and grabbed Elara's arm, pulling her into the corridor. Who else is in the house? She demanded. Just the staff. Mrs. Calloway, Bess, the maids. Where's Mrs. Calloway now? I don't know. They ran downstairs, found the housekeeper in the kitchen, calmly polishing silver. She looked up when they burst in. Your Grace? Is something wrong? Where were you just now? Rowan demanded. Here, why? Someone slammed a door upstairs. Perhaps the wind and... It wasn't the wind. Elara stepped forward. Mrs. Calloway, how long have you worked here? 15 years, Your Grace. Were you here when the first Duchess died? The housekeeper's face didn't change. I was. And did you notice anything unusual before her death? Anyone visiting? Any doctors? There were several doctors. His Grace brought in specialists from London. Do you remember their names? Mrs. Calloway's eyes narrowed. Why are you asking? Answer the question. I don't recall. It was 2 years ago. Elara pulled the letter from her pocket. Was one of them named Nathaniel Greaves? The room went silent. Mrs. Calloway set down the silver very carefully. Where did you get that? Answer me. Dr. Greaves was one of the physicians, yes. He treated the Duchess for several months before her death. Rowan's face went white. You never told me his name. You never asked. Where is he now? I don't know. You're lying. Elara's voice was ice. You've been lying this whole time. You knew what was happening to Catherine. You knew and you did nothing. I did my job. Your job was to protect the people in this house. Mrs. Calloway's expression finally cracked. My job was to survive, and I suggest you do the same, Your Grace. She walked out. Elara turned to Rowan. We need to find this doctor, now. If he was poisoning Catherine, he's long gone. Maybe. Or maybe he's still close. Maybe he's been waiting. For what? Elara's throat went dry. For the next Duchess. Rowan stared at her. Then he grabbed his coat. We're going to the village. Someone there will know where Greaves went. And if they don't, then we go to London, but we're not staying here. Not tonight. The village was small, grim, and unwelcoming. The kind of place where everyone knew everyone else's business, but no one talked about it. They went to the inn first. The innkeeper, a squat man with suspicious eyes, claimed he'd never heard of Dr. Greaves. Doctors don't come through here much, he said. We handle our own problems. He would have been here 2 years ago, Rowan pressed. Tall man, probably in his 50s. Would have been traveling to Ashford Manor regularly. The innkeeper shrugged. Don't recall. Elara leaned across the bar. We'll pay for information? That got his attention. How much? Enough. He glanced around, then lowered his voice. There was a man like that. Stayed here for a few months, kept to himself. Left sudden-like, middle of the night. Didn't pay his bill. Where did he go? Didn't say, but he had letters delivered. Saw the address once, London, Marylebone. Elara and Rowan exchanged a glance. Anything else? Just that he creeped out the maids. Asked too many questions about the manor. About the family. The innkeeper paused. And about the inheritance. Rowan's jaw clenched. They left the inn and stood in the street, the wind cutting through their coats. He was after your money, Elara said. Catherine's money, technically. It was part of her dowry. If she died without children, it reverted to her family. But if I'd been implicated in her death, if I'd been tried, convicted, the estate would have been seized. Her relatives would have gotten everything. So Greaves drove her mad, made it look like suicide, and walked away clean. Except he didn't walk away. Rowan's voice was hard. He's still out there, and if he's working with your guardian, then Thomas sent me here on purpose. The realization hit her like a fist. He knew what happened to Catherine. He knew about Greaves, and he sent me here anyway. To get rid of you. Elara's hands were shaking. He wanted me dead or mad. Either way, he'd control my father's estate. The entailment only holds if I'm alive and unmarried. But if I die here, if it looks like the same thing that happened to Catherine, then he inherits everything. They stared at each other. We need to leave, Rowan said. Tonight. We'll go to London, find Greaves, turn him over to the authorities. And if we can't prove anything, then we disappear. Change our names. Start over. Elara's chest tightened. She'd fought so hard to escape one cage. She wasn't going to run into another. No, she said. Elara, no, I'm not running. If Greaves is coming for me, let him come. But we're doing this on our terms, in our house. That's suicide. It's a trap, and we're going to set it. Rowan looked at her like she'd lost her mind. You want to use yourself as bait. I want to end this. If we run, he'll just find another target, another woman, another victim. It stops here. You don't know what you're asking. Yes, I do. She met his eyes. I'm asking you to trust me and to help me. For a long moment, he didn't move. Then he exhaled, sharp and frustrated. This is insane. I know. We could both die. I know. You're not going to change your mind, are you? No. He shook his head, half angry, half admiring. You're going to get us both killed. Maybe, but at least we'll go down fighting. He almost smiled. All right, we do this your way, but we do it smart. No heroics. We set the trap, we get proof, and we get out. Agreed. They shook hands again. And as they walked back toward the waiting carriage, Elara felt something shift inside her. She wasn't a victim anymore. She was the hunter, and Dr. Nathaniel Greaves had no idea what was coming for him. Bam! They returned to Ashford Manor as the sun set, painting the cliffs in shades of fire. The house loomed ahead, dark and waiting. Elara's pulse quickened as they stepped inside. Mrs. Calloway was nowhere to be seen. She's hiding, Rowan said quietly. Or warning Greaves. They moved through the house, checking rooms, locking doors. Rowan sent the remaining staff away, told them to take the week off, paid them in advance. Within an hour, the manor was empty except for the two of them. Elara stood in the entrance hall, listening to the silence. "What now?" she asked. "Now we wait. If Greaves is coming, he'll come tonight." "How do you know?" "Because if I were him, that's what I'd do. The house is empty. You're vulnerable. It's the perfect opportunity." Elara nodded. Her hands were steady, but her heart was pounding. They moved to the library, central location, multiple exits, and Rowan had a pistol there, kept in a locked drawer. He loaded it carefully, handed it to her. "Do you know how to use this? Point and pull the trigger?" "Close enough." He took it back, checked it again, then set it on the table between them. "If something happens, if we get separated, you run. Don't try to be brave, just run." "I'm not leaving you." "Elara, I'm not." He looked at her, something unreadable in his eyes. "You're the most stubborn person I've ever met." "Thank you." He almost laughed. They waited. The hours crawled by. Midnight came and went. The house creaked and settled around them, every sound making Elara jump. And then, just past 2 a.m, she heard it. Footsteps. Slow. Deliberate. Coming from the east wing. Rowan heard it too. He grabbed the pistol, his face grim. "Stay behind me." They moved into the corridor. The footsteps were louder now, descending the stairs, heading toward them. A figure appeared at the far end of the hall, tall, gaunt, carrying a medical bag. Dr. Nathaniel Greaves smiled. "Your Grace," he said pleasantly. "How lovely to see you again." Rowan raised the pistol. "Don't move." Greaves stopped, hands raised in mock surrender. Now, there's no need for violence. I'm only here to help." "Help?" Elara's voice was shaking with fury. "You murdered Catherine. Murder is such an ugly word. I prefer to think of it as expediting the inevitable. You poisoned her, drove her mad. I treated her. She was unwell. Sadly, she didn't respond to treatment." "You did it for money." Greaves tilted his head. "Partly. Though I must admit the experiment itself was fascinating. Laudanum, belladonna, a touch of mercury, properly administered, they can create the most remarkable delusions. Catherine truly believed the house was haunted by the time I was done. Quite poetic, really." Rowan's finger tightened on the trigger. "Don't!" Greaves said sharply. "Shoot me and you'll never know who else is involved. Did you really think I was working alone?" Elara's blood ran cold. "Thomas. Among others. Your dear guardian has been very cooperative, though I must say sending you here was almost too easy. I expected more resistance." "He wanted me dead." "He wanted you compliant. Dead works too, of course. But mad is so much more profitable. A nice long stay in an asylum, a signed confession that you're unfit to manage your affairs. Thomas gets control of everything, and I get paid." "You're insane," Rowan said. "I'm practical." Greaves reached into his coat. Rowan fired. The shot went wide, splintering the wall. Greaves lunged, faster than a man his age should move, and suddenly there was a syringe in his hand, glinting in the candlelight. Elara screamed. Rowan threw himself between them, grappling for the weapon. They crashed into the wall, the pistol skittering across the floor. Greaves was strong, wiry and desperate, and he fought like a man with nothing to lose. The syringe flashed toward Rowan's neck. Elara didn't think. She grabbed the fallen pistol, aimed, and fired. The shot echoed like thunder. Greaves staggered, looked down at the spreading red stain on his chest, looked up at Elara, his expression almost surprised. "Well," he said, "that's inconvenient." He collapsed. Rowan scrambled back, breathing hard. Elara stood frozen, the pistol still raised, her hands shaking violently. "Is he—" She couldn't finish. Rowan checked for a pulse, shook his head. Elara dropped the gun. She'd killed him. She'd actually killed him. Her knees gave out. Rowan caught her before she hit the floor. "It's over," he said. "It's over." But Elara knew better, because somewhere in London, Thomas Greaves was still alive. And he'd sent one killer. He could send more. The body lay in the corridor for 3 hours before either of them could move it. Elara sat on the floor, her back against the wall, staring at the dark pool spreading beneath Dr. Greaves's chest. Her hands were still shaking. She'd wiped them on her skirt twice, but she could still feel the weight of the pistol, the kick of the recoil, the moment when everything changed. Rowan paced, back and forth, his boots leaving prints in the blood. "We have to call the magistrate," he said for the fourth time. "And tell him what?" Elara's voice was hoarse. "That I shot a man in your house? That he was part of a conspiracy to drive me mad? With what proof?" "The letters. The drugs in the cellar. His confession. You heard him." "We heard him. There were no witnesses." Rowan stopped pacing. "So what do you suggest? We bury him in the garden and pretend this never happened?" "I'm suggesting we think before we act. If we go to the authorities now, Thomas will spin this. He'll say I was unstable, that I killed an innocent physician, that you helped me cover it up. We'll both hang. We have evidence. We have circumstantial evidence. Letters that don't explicitly name anyone. Drugs that could have been there for decades. And a dead body with my bullet in it." She looked up at him. "Thomas is connected. He has money, influence. We have a scandal-plagued duke and a desperate woman with no family. Who do you think they'll believe?" Rowan's jaw worked. He knew she was right. "Then what?" he asked quietly. Elara forced herself to stand. Her legs felt like water, but she locked her knees and stayed upright. "We go to London. We find proof that links Thomas to Greaves directly. Bank records, correspondence, anything that shows they were working together. Then we go to the authorities with a case they can't ignore." "And Greaves?" She looked at the body, felt bile rise in her throat. "We hide him, just for a few days, long enough to build our case. This is insane." "I know. If we're caught, we won't be." Rowan stared at her. "You're not the same woman who showed up at my door a month ago." "No, I'm not." Something flickered in his eyes. Respect, maybe, or fear. He nodded once. "The old wine cellar. No one goes down there. We can seal it off, make it look like part of the renovation." "You're sure?" "No, but it's the best option we have." They moved together. Elara grabbed Greaves's feet, Rowan his shoulders. The body was heavy, awkward, still warm. She tried not to think about the fact that 20 minutes ago, this had been a person. A monster, yes, but a person. The cellar stairs were narrow and steep. Twice they almost dropped him. By the time they reached the bottom, Elara was shaking so hard her teeth chattered. They laid him in the corner, covered him with an old tarp. Rowan nailed boards across the door frame upstairs, made it look like structural work. When it was done, they stood in the corridor, both of them streaked with dust and worse. "We should clean up," Rowan said. Elara nodded but didn't move. "Elara, I killed him. He was trying to kill me. I know, but I still—" Her voice broke. "I pulled the trigger. I watched him fall. And I do it again. What does that make me?" Rowan crossed to her, gripped her shoulders. "It makes you a survivor. Nothing more, nothing less." "I don't feel like a survivor. I feel like a murderer." "Then we're both murderers, because if you hadn't shot him, I would have." He met her eyes. "We did what we had to do. Now we finish it." She took a shaky breath, nodded. They cleaned the blood from the floor with lye and rags, scrubbing until the stone was raw. Burned Elara's dress in the kitchen fire. Changed clothes, washed their hands 3 times each. By the time dawn broke, there was no visible evidence that anything had happened, but Elara could still smell the blood. They left for London at midday, telling no one where they were going. The journey took 8 hours by train, the compartment rattling and cold. Elara stared out the window, watching the countryside blur past, her mind numb. Rowan sat across from her, reading through the letters they'd found in the cellar. His face was grim. "What?" she asked. "There are names here, people I recognize, lords, magistrates. Half of them are in Thomas's pocket. Can we use that?" "Maybe, if we can prove they knew what Greaves was doing." He tossed the letters aside. "This goes deeper than I thought." "Corruption usually does." He looked at her sharply. "You sound like you expected this." "I grew up watching my father navigate these circles. The rich protect the rich. Always have, always will." "Then why are we bothering? If the system's rigged because the alternative is worse. We can fight a rigged system. We can't fight silence." Rowan leaned back, rubbing his face. I hope you're right. So do I. London appeared through the smoke and fog, a sprawling gray mass that swallowed the horizon. They took a hansom cab to a small hotel in Bloomsbury. Nothing fancy, nothing that would draw attention. Paid cash, used false names. The room was cramped and smelled of old tobacco, but it had a lock on the door. Elara sat on the bed, exhaustion crashing over her like a wave. What's the plan? Rowan asked. We find Thomas. Watch him. See who he meets with, where he goes. If he's working with others, he'll slip up eventually. And if he doesn't, then we make him, Todd. Thomas Greaves lived in Mayfair, in a townhouse far too grand for a man who'd spent his life envying his brother's modest estate. Elara and Rowan watched from across the street, tucked into the shadow of a doorway, hats pulled low. How did he afford that? Rowan muttered. Probably with money he stole from my father, or money Greaves paid him. They'd been standing there for 2 hours. Thomas hadn't emerged. This is a waste of time, Rowan said. We should just confront him. And say what? We killed your partner? Here's why. He'll have us arrested before we finish the sentence. So we just stand here? Until we see something useful, yes. Rowan looked like he wanted to argue, but a carriage pulled up to the townhouse before he could. A man stepped out, tall, silver-haired, expensively dressed. Elara recognized him immediately. That's Lord Pemberton, she breathed. He sits on the Judiciary Committee. What's he doing here? I don't know, but it's not a social call. They watched as Pemberton knocked. Thomas opened the door himself, unusual for a man who employed servants, and ushered him inside quickly. We need to hear what they're saying, Elara said. How? Walk up and knock? She scanned the street. There, a narrow alley running between the townhouses. Servant's entrance. Come on! They crossed quickly, slipping into the alley. The back door was locked, but the window beside it was cracked open. Rowan boosted her up. She balanced on the sill, straining to hear. Voices, muffled but audible. Problem is contained? Pemberton's voice, clipped and impatient. For now. Thomas sounded nervous. But Greaves hasn't reported in. I sent him to Ashford Manor 3 days ago. He should have been back by now. Then send someone to check. I did. The house is empty. Staff dismissed. Duke and Duchess gone. A pause. Gone where? I don't know. You don't know? Pemberton's voice turned sharp. This was supposed to be simple. The girl dies or goes mad. You inherit. We split the proceeds. Now you're telling me she's vanished and Greaves is missing? I'm telling you there's been a complication. Complications get people hanged, Thomas. Elara's heart was hammering. She leaned closer. If she's run, Thomas said, she won't get far. She has no money, no allies. She has the Duke. That's an ally. Ashford's a recluse. He won't risk exposure. You underestimate desperation. Pemberton's tone turned cold. Find them, quietly. Use whatever resources you need. If Greaves failed, we clean this up ourselves. And if they've gone to the authorities, then we have a magistrate in our pocket who'll make sure their claims go nowhere. But I'd prefer not to rely on that. Dead witnesses are simpler than discredited ones. Elara's blood turned to ice. Rowan grabbed her ankle, pulling her down. We need to go. Now! They ran. Back through the alley, into the street, blending into the evening crowd. Didn't stop until they were 6 blocks away, both of them gasping for air. They're going to kill us, Elara said. I heard. Pemberton's involved. A sitting lord. How many others? Enough that going to the authorities is suicide. Rowan's face was pale. We're on our own. Elara leaned against a lamppost, her mind racing. Then we need leverage, something so damning they can't bury it. Like what? Like proof of payment. Bank records showing money moving from Thomas to Greaves, correspondence that explicitly outlines the plan, something that can't be explained away. Where do we get that? Thomas's study. He's meticulous. My father used to complain about it. If there's evidence, he'll have kept it. Rowan stared at her. You want to break into his house? I want to burgle his house, yes. That's insane. We're already hiding a body and running from a conspiracy. Insanity is relative. Elara, what's the alternative, Rowan? We hide? They'll find us. We run? They'll follow. The only way out is through. He exhaled sharply, shaking his head. You're going to get us both killed. Probably. And you're not going to change your mind. No. He almost smiled. I'm starting to think you're the dangerous one in this marriage. Just starting? They waited until midnight. The townhouse was dark, the street empty except for a few drunks stumbling home. Elara wore a plain dress borrowed from the hotel maid, her hair pinned under a cap. Rowan looked like a workman in rough clothes and a flat cap. They approached from the alley again. This time, Rowan picked the lock on the servant's entrance, a skill he claimed to have learned as a bored adolescent. The door swung open silently. Inside, the house was quiet. Too quiet. Elara's nerves screamed that this was a trap, but they were committed now. They moved through the kitchen into the hallway. Thomas's study was on the second floor. Elara remembered visiting as a child, watching him work while her father conducted business. The stairs creaked under their weight. Elara froze, heart pounding. Nothing. They reached the study. Locked. Rowan knelt, working the lock with a thin piece of wire. It took 3 agonizing minutes before it clicked. The study was exactly as Elara remembered. Mahogany desk, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, a safe in the corner. Start with the desk, she whispered. I'll check the safe. You can crack a safe? My father taught me. He said a woman should know how to protect her valuables. Remind me to never cross you. They worked in silence. Elara pressed her ear to the safe, turning the dial slowly, listening for the tumblers. It was harder than she remembered. Her hands were shaking, sweat dripping into her eyes. Behind her, Rowan rifled through drawers, pulling out ledgers, letters, anything that looked relevant. Here, he breathed. Account transfers, large sums, regular intervals, all to an N. Greaves. Take it. The safe clicked. Elara pulled the door open. Inside, stacks of banknotes, jewelry, and letters, she said. Dozens of them. She pulled them out, scanned the first one. Thomas, the arrangement is proceeding as planned. The girl will be dead or committed within the month. Ensure the Duke remains cooperative. Payment upon completion. N.G. This is it, Elara whispered. This is proof. Then let's go. A floorboard creaked in the hallway. They froze. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate. The door swung open. Thomas stood there, holding a pistol. Hello, niece, he said calmly. I was wondering when you'd show up. Elara's mind went blank. Thomas stepped into the room, closing the door behind him. He was dressed for bed, but his eyes were sharp, alert. You've been busy, he said, glancing at the scattered papers. Breaking and entering. Theft. My. What would your father think? My father would think you're a murdering bastard, Elara said, her voice steadier than she felt. Thomas smiled. Language, dear. It's unbecoming. Where's Greaves? I was about to ask you the same thing. He went to Ashford Manor and never returned. Imagine my surprise when I heard you and the Duke were in London, skulking around like common criminals. We're not the criminals here. No? You killed a man, Elara. Shot him in cold blood. That's rather criminal, wouldn't you say? Rowan stepped forward. He was trying to murder me. So you claim, but you'll forgive me if I don't take the word of a man who's already killed one wife. I didn't kill Catherine. Tell that to the jury. Thomas gestured with the pistol. Now, put down whatever you've stolen and step away from the desk. No, Elara said. Thomas's expression didn't change. I wasn't asking. Then shoot me. But you won't get this evidence. It's already been copied, sent to 3 separate solicitors. If anything happens to us, it goes public. It was a bluff. A desperate, reckless bluff. Thomas's eyes narrowed. You're lying. Am I? You want to take that chance? For a long moment, no one moved. Then Thomas lowered the pistol slightly. Even if that's true, you have no proof I knew what Greaves was doing. Conspiracy requires intent. All you have are letters from a rogue physician. We have bank records, payments from your accounts to his. Payment for medical services. Perfectly legal. We have a witness. Mrs. Calloway saw everything. Mrs. Calloway is loyal to the Ashford family. She'll say whatever the Duke tells her to say. Thomas shook his head. You have nothing that will stand up in court. Nothing that won't be dismissed as the ravings of an unstable woman and a disgraced nobleman. Then why are you here? Rowan demanded. If we're so harmless, why confront us at all? Thomas smiled. Because loose ends are untidy, and I dislike untidiness. He raised the pistol again. Elara lunged for the desk, grabbing the first heavy object she could find, a marble paperweight, and hurled it. It struck Thomas's shoulder. He staggered, the gun going off with a deafening crack. The bullet buried itself in the wall. Rowan tackled him. They went down hard, grappling for the weapon. Thomas fought like a man possessed, all wiry strength and desperation. Elara grabbed a letter opener from the desk, her hand shaking. Rowan! He looked up just as Thomas's finger found the trigger. Elara stabbed down. The blade sank into Thomas's hand. He screamed, releasing the gun. Rowan grabbed it, scrambled back, aimed. Thomas clutched his bleeding hand, his face twisted with fury. You're both dead. Do you hear me? Dead. I'll hunt you to the ends of the earth. Shut up. Rowan's voice was ice. Get up. Slowly. Thomas stood, cradling his hand. We're going to the magistrate, Rowan said. You're going to confess everything. Greaves, Pemberton, all of it. I'll say nothing. Then you'll hang for attempted murder. Your choice. They won't believe you. Maybe not. But they'll believe this. Elara held up the letters, the ledgers, the evidence they'd gathered. And when the newspapers get hold of it, when the scandal breaks, you'll be ruined even if you're not convicted. Thomas's face went white. You won't, he said. You wouldn't dare Try me. For the first time, doubt flickered in his eyes. Then the door behind them burst open. Lord Pemberton stood there, flanked by two men with pistols. I thought I heard a commotion, he said pleasantly. Good evening, Your Grace, Miss Whitcomb. Or should I say, Duchess? Elara's stomach dropped. They were surrounded, and this time there was no way out. Pemberton stepped into the room, his expression calm, almost amused. Put down the gun, Your Grace. There's no need for further theatrics. Rowan kept the pistol trained on Thomas. Stay back. Or what? You'll shoot me? In front of witnesses? I don't think so. Pemberton gestured to his men. Lower your weapon, or they'll fire. And at this range, they won't miss. Elara's heart was hammering so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. She looked at Rowan, saw the calculation in his eyes. They were outgunned, outmaneuvered. Slowly, Rowan lowered the pistol. Wise choice. Pemberton nodded to one of his men, who stepped forward and took the weapon. Now, let's discuss this situation like civilized people. There's nothing to discuss, Elara said. You're part of a conspiracy to commit murder. We have proof. Do you? Pemberton glanced at the papers scattered across the desk. Letters from a physician conducting legitimate medical treatments. Bank transfers for services rendered. Hardly damning. You just threatened to have us killed. Did I? I don't recall making any such statement. Do you, Thomas? Thomas, still clutching his bleeding hand, shook his head. I heard no threats. Only the hysterical accusations of a disturbed young woman. I'm not disturbed. Aren't you? You killed a man, Elara, shot him in your husband's home. Then you fled, broke into your guardian's residence, assaulted him. Pemberton's smile widened. That sounds rather disturbed to me. Greaves was trying to kill us. Again, so you claim. But where's the body? Where's your proof? Elara's mouth went dry. They'd hidden Greaves. There was no body to produce, no evidence of self-defense. And suddenly, she understood. They'd been set up from the beginning. You wanted us to kill him, she said slowly. You knew we'd fight back, knew we'd hide the body. That's why you sent him alone. Pemberton's smile didn't waver. That's an interesting theory, completely unprovable, of course. You used him, just like you used Catherine. I used no one. Dr. Greaves was a skilled physician who unfortunately met with foul play. Once his body is discovered, and it will be, you and the Duke will be charged with murder. Given your husband's history, I suspect the trial will be quite short. Rowan's face had gone pale. You're framing us. I'm simply allowing the evidence to speak for itself. Pemberton gestured to his men. Take them, quietly. We'll hold them until we've secured the scene at Ashford Manor. The men moved forward. Elara's mind raced. They needed leverage, something to shift the balance. And then she remembered. Wait, she said. Before you do this, there's something you should know. Pemberton paused. I'm listening. We did make copies of the letters, sent them to solicitors, just like I said. Another bluff. Is it? Because if we disappear tonight, if we're found dead or committed, those letters go public. Every name in them, every transaction, including yours. Pemberton's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. You're lying. Then call my bluff. Arrest us. See what happens. Elara stepped forward, her voice steady despite the terror clawing at her chest. Or we make a deal. What kind of deal? We walk away. Disappear. You never hear from us again. In exchange, the letters stay buried. And Greaves? Died in an accident, tragic but unavoidable. Pemberton studied her. You expect me to believe you'll just vanish? Live the rest of your life in hiding? I expect you to believe I value my life more than justice, which is true. It wasn't, but Pemberton didn't need to know that. He considered, glanced at Thomas, who looked furious but said nothing. Even if I agreed, Pemberton said slowly, how do I know you won't resurface? Make claims, stir up trouble? Because if we do, you'll have us killed. And we know it. Elara met his eyes. We're not stupid. We know we can't win this fight. But we can make it expensive for you, messy, public, or we can disappear and you never have to think about us again. Silence. Pemberton turned to Thomas. What do you think? Thomas's jaw was tight. I think she's playing us. Perhaps, but she's not wrong about the mess. Pemberton looked back at Elara. You have 24 hours. Disappear. Leave England if you're smart. If I see you or hear from you again, the deal is void. Agreed. And the letters? Elara gathered them from the desk, along with the ledgers, handed them over. Pemberton flipped through them, nodded. If I find out you kept copies, you won't. He stared at her for a long moment. Then he stepped aside. 24 hours. Starting now. Elara grabbed Rowan's arm. They walked to the door, past the armed men, past Thomas's murderous glare. Made it to the hallway. Down the stairs. Out the servants' entrance. Into the street. They didn't run. Didn't speak. Just walked, fast and steady, until they were 6 blocks away. Then Elara stopped, doubled over, and vomited into the gutter. Rowan steadied her, his hand on her back. Did you actually send copies? He asked quietly. She wiped her mouth. No? Then how? I gambled. He's arrogant, but he's not stupid. He knows a scandal would hurt him, even if it didn't convict him, so he took the safer bet. She straightened, still shaking. But he's right about one thing. We can't stay in England. Where do we go? I don't know. Somewhere far. Somewhere they won't follow. Rowan looked at her, something unreadable in his expression. You just lied to a lord, threatened him, and walked away. You're either the bravest person I've ever met or the most reckless. Both, remember? He almost laughed. Then a voice behind them said, Well, well, isn't this cozy? They spun. Mrs. Calloway stood in the shadows, a small pistol in her hand. I thought you might try something like this, she said calmly, so I followed. Elara's heart sank. Mrs. Calloway. I worked for the Ashford family for 15 years, watched Catherine suffer, watched her die, and I did nothing. The housekeeper's voice was steady, but her eyes were haunted. I won't make that mistake again. She raised the pistol, aimed at Elara, and fired. The shot went wide. Not by much. Elara felt the heat of the bullet as it screamed past her ear and buried itself in the brick wall behind her. Her knees buckled. Rowan caught her before she hit the ground, yanking her sideways into the mouth of an alley. Mrs. Calloway didn't fire again. Instead, she lowered the pistol, her hand shaking so badly the weapon nearly slipped from her grip. In the dim gaslight, her face looked carved from wax, eyes hollow. I can't, she said, her voice breaking. I thought I could, but I can't. Elara's heart was hammering so hard she could barely breathe. Then why did you shoot? Because I'm a coward. Mrs. Calloway's fingers loosened on the pistol. It clattered to the cobblestones. I stood by while they destroyed Catherine, watched them poison her, watched her lose her mind, and I did nothing. I told myself I was protecting my position, that it wasn't my place to interfere, but the truth is I was scared. And when she died, I convinced myself it was mercy, that she was better off. It wasn't mercy, Rowan said, his voice hard. It was murder. I know. Mrs. Calloway's eyes glistened. I've known since the day they found her on the rocks, and I've lived with it every day since. But when you came to the manor, Your Grace, she looked at Elara. When you started asking questions, digging into things that should have stayed buried, I thought history was repeating. I thought I could stop it this time. Save you by scaring you away, but you wouldn't leave. And then Greaves came back, and I knew— You knew he'd try to kill me, Elara finished. Mrs. Calloway nodded, tears streaming down her face. I couldn't watch it happen again, so I followed you to London. Thought maybe I could warn you, or— I don't know. I don't know what I thought. She bent, picked up the pistol with trembling hands, and held it out. Take it. I won't use it again. Rowan took the weapon, checked it, tucked it into his coat. Why are you telling us this? Because you need to know the truth. All of it. Mrs. Calloway straightened, wiping her eyes. Greaves wasn't working alone. He had help inside the house. Someone who gave him access to Catherine's food, her medicine. Someone who made sure the doors stayed locked when she tried to run. Elara's stomach turned. Who? Me. The word hung in the air like poison. He told me it was treatment, Mrs. Calloway continued, her voice barely audible. Said the Duke had authorized it. That Catherine was dangerous to herself and needed constant care. I believed him. Or I wanted to believe him. By the time I realized what was really happening, it was too late. She was already— Her voice cracked. She was already gone. Rowan looked like he'd been punched. You helped him kill my wife. I didn't know. You suspected. You must have. Yes. Mrs. Calloway's shoulders sagged. Yes, I suspected. And I did nothing. That's the truth you wanted, isn't it? I'm as guilty as Greaves. More maybe because I had chances to stop it and I didn't take them. Elara felt something shift inside her. Not forgiveness exactly, but understanding. Mrs. Calloway wasn't a monster. She was just a woman who'd made terrible choices out of fear and convinced herself they were justified. How many people did that? How many looked the other way because speaking up was too dangerous, too costly? What do you want from us? Elara asked. Nothing. I just wanted you to know. Mrs. Calloway looked at Rowan. Your wife wasn't mad, Your Grace. She was terrified and alone, and no one believed her. If there's any justice in this world, you'll make sure people know that. And you? Rowan's voice was cold. What happens to you? Whatever you decide. Turn me over to the magistrate. Leave me here. It doesn't matter. I'm already dead. Have been for 2 years. She turned and walked away, disappearing into the fog. Elara and Rowan stood in the alley, both of them shaking. We should go after her, Rowan said without conviction. To what end? She's right. She's already punished herself more than any court could. That's not justice. No, but it's honest. Elara pulled her coat tighter. And right now, honesty is all we have. They didn't have 24 hours. They had maybe 6 before Pemberton realized they'd played him and sent people to finish what Greaves had started, which meant they needed to move fast and think faster. They went back to the hotel, packed their few belongings, and checked out before dawn. Rowan had contacts, old school friends, business acquaintances, people who owed him favors, and he started calling them in. By noon, they had passage on a ship leaving for France the next evening. Not ideal, but it bought them time. But Elara couldn't shake the feeling that running was exactly what Pemberton wanted. We're giving up, she said as they sat in a cramped coffee house near the docks, nursing bitter tea. We're staying alive, Rowan countered. Same thing, in this case. Elara, they win. Don't you see? They murdered Catherine, they tried to murder me, and they walk away clean because we're too scared to fight back. We fought, we lost. We lost a battle. That doesn't mean the war's over. Rowan set down his cup. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting we stop playing their game and start playing ours. Elara leaned forward. Pemberton's arrogant. He thinks we're beaten because we gave him the letters, but we don't need letters. We need something he can't bury or explain away. Something public. Like what? Like testimony from someone he can't silence. Who? Mrs. Calloway? She's complicit. No one will believe her. Not her. Elara's mind was racing. Catherine's family. They must have suspected something when she died. What if we go to them, tell them what really happened? They have standing to demand an investigation. Pemberton can't dismiss them as easily as he can dismiss us. Rowan shook his head. Catherine's father is dead. Her mother remarried and moved to Scotland. Her brother... He stopped. Her brother's in Parliament. Elara felt a spark of hope. Can you reach him? Maybe. We weren't close, but he visited the manor a few times after Catherine died. Asked questions the inquest didn't. I think he knew something was wrong, but he couldn't prove it. Then we give him proof. We don't have proof. We gave it to Pemberton. We have our testimony. We have Mrs. Calloway's confession. We have the drugs in the cellar, the hidden passage. Elara grabbed his hand. We have enough to raise reasonable doubt. And if Catherine's brother pushes for a new inquest, Pemberton's involvement will come out. He won't risk that. Rowan stared at her. You're gambling everything on the chance that a man I barely know will believe us. Do you have a better idea? He didn't. Catherine's brother was named Henry Aldridge, and he lived in a narrow townhouse in Westminster that smelled of pipe smoke and old books. They arrived unannounced. Showing up on doorsteps seemed to be becoming a habit, and the butler nearly turned them away before Rowan gave his name. Henry appeared in the doorway 5 minutes later, a tall man in his 40s with Catherine's eyes and none of her warmth. Ashford, he said flatly, I wasn't expecting you. I know. I'm sorry to intrude, but I need to speak with you. It's about Catherine. Henry's expression didn't change, but something flickered behind his eyes. Come in. They followed him to a study lined with law books and parliamentary records. Henry gestured for them to sit, but didn't offer tea or pleasantries. What about Catherine? He asked. Rowan glanced at Elara, then back at Henry. She didn't kill herself. She was murdered. Henry's face went very still. Explain. So they did. Everything. Greaves, the drugs, the conspiracy, Thomas, Pemberton. Elara watched Henry's expression shift from skepticism to shock to cold, burning fury. When they finished, he stood and walked to the window, staring out at the street. I knew, he said quietly. Not the details, but I knew something was wrong. Catherine wrote to me a month before she died. Said she was frightened, that the doctors were making her worse instead of better. I told her to leave, come stay with me. She said Ashford wouldn't let her. Rowan flinched. I know. I visited the manor after she died, saw how broken you were, realized you weren't the villain she'd described in that letter. Henry turned to face them. But someone was, and the inquest was a joke. They ruled it accidental in under an hour, refused to hear testimony from the servants, dismissed every inconsistency. I tried to fight it, but I was one voice against a system that wanted the scandal buried. We can reopen it, Elara said. You have the authority, and we have new evidence. What evidence? Your testimony? A confession from a complicit housekeeper? Drugs that could have been planted? Pemberton will tear it apart. Then make him answer questions under oath. Force him to explain his connection to Thomas, to Greaves. Even if we can't convict him, we can expose him. Henry studied her. You're Lady Whitcomb's daughter. It wasn't a question. Yes, I knew your father. Good man. Honest. He paused. You're suggesting I risk my career, possibly my life, on the word of two people I barely know, to pursue a case that will make powerful enemies. Yes. Why should I? Because your sister deserves justice, and because if you don't, there will be other Catherines. Other women driven to madness or death because men like Pemberton decided they were inconvenient. Henry considered this. Then he walked to his desk, pulled out a sheet of paper, and began writing. I'll file a motion to reopen the inquest. It'll take time, weeks, maybe months, but I have colleagues who owe me favors. We'll build a case. He looked up. But you need to disappear. If Pemberton knows you're involved, he'll have you killed before this gets to trial. We're already planning to leave England, Rowan said. Good. Go tonight. I'll send word when it's safe to return. Elara stood. Thank you. Henry shook his head. Don't thank me yet. This could all fall apart, but if it doesn't, his voice hardened. I'm going to make sure everyone who hurt my sister pays. They left London that evening, boarded a ship bound for Calais just as the sun set. The channel was rough, the crossing miserable, but Elara barely noticed. Her mind was too full of everything they'd set in motion. Rowan stood at the railing beside her, watching England disappear into the fog. "Do you think he'll succeed?" he asked. "I don't know. But we gave him the ammunition. What he does with it is up to him. And if Pemberton comes after us anyway, then we keep running, or we fight." She looked at him. "You've been quiet since we left Henry's house." "I've been thinking." "About?" "About how I failed Catherine, how I let Greaves into my house, trusted him with her care, ignored the signs that something was wrong." His voice cracked. "She was terrified, and I thought she was ill. I thought I was helping." "You were lied to, manipulated. That doesn't absolve me." "No. But it means you're not the villain here." Elara hesitated, then reached out and took his hand. "You couldn't save Catherine, but you helped save me. That has to count for something." He looked down at their joined hands, his expression unreadable. "I didn't marry you for love." "I know. But somewhere along the way that changed." Elara's breath caught. "Rowan, I'm not asking for anything," he said quickly. "I just wanted you to know, in case things go wrong." She squeezed his hand. "Things are already wrong. They have been since the day I showed up at your door. But we're still here. Still fighting. That's worth something too." He almost smiled. The ship rocked, waves crashing against the hull, and for the first time in weeks, Elara felt something close to hope. They'd lost battles. But the war wasn't over yet. France was cold and wet and utterly foreign. They found lodging in a small village outside Calais, a farmhouse owned by a widow who asked no questions and accepted payment in advance. It wasn't comfortable. The roof leaked, the floors were uneven, and the bed was barely large enough for one person, let alone two, but it was safe. For the first few days, they barely left the house. Rowan scoured every newspaper he could find, looking for news from England. Elara wrote letters, coded careful messages to Henry, updating him on their location and asking for progress reports. The replies came slowly. The inquest was being reopened, but there was resistance. Pemberton had allies, and they were pushing back hard. Henry was fighting, but it was uphill. "It's not enough," Rowan said one evening, tossing a letter onto the table. "Even if the inquest rules in our favor, Pemberton won't face trial. He's too well connected." So we wait. For what? Justice that will never come? For the right moment. There is no right moment, Elara. We're in exile, living on borrowed time, hoping a system designed to protect men like Pemberton suddenly decides to hold him accountable. It's not going to happen. Then we make it happen. He looked at her sharply. How? Elara stood pacing the small room. An idea had been forming in the back of her mind for days, but she hadn't voiced it yet because it was dangerous, reckless, possibly suicidal. But it might work. Pemberton's power comes from secrecy, she said slowly, from the fact that his crimes are hidden, deniable. What if we take that away? We tried. He buried the evidence. Not all of it. We still have our testimony, Mrs. Calloway's confession, and we have something else, Catherine's letter to Henry, the one where she described what was happening to her. If we publish it, if we make it public before the inquest can suppress it, Rowan's eyes widened. You want to go to the press? I want to flood the press. Every newspaper in London, every scandal sheet, every gossip column, make it impossible to bury. That's insane. Pemberton will sue for libel or have us arrested. Only if we're in England, but we're not. Elara turned to face him. We send the story anonymously. Let the papers do the work. By the time Pemberton realizes what's happening, it'll be too late to stop it. Rowan stared at her. You really think that will work? I think it's the only thing that might. Public opinion is the one thing Pemberton can't control. If enough people demand answers, the government will have to act. Or they'll close ranks and protect him. Maybe. But at least we'll have tried. He was silent for a long moment, his jaw working. Then he nodded. All right. We do it your way. But we need help. Someone in London who can distribute the story without being traced back to us. Elara thought. What about Henry? Too risky. If Pemberton suspects he's involved, it'll undermine the inquest. Then who? Rowan hesitated. There's a journalist I knew in school. Muckraker type, always digging up scandals. Last I heard, he was working for one of the penny dreadfuls. Can you trust him? To print a story that will sell papers and embarrass the aristocracy? Absolutely. Then write to him. Untouchable. The letter took 3 drafts to get right. They needed to give enough detail to be credible without revealing their location or identities. Rowan wrote it in a hand different from his usual script, signed it with a pseudonym. Elara enclosed Catherine's letter to Henry, the original, not a copy. It was a risk, but the handwriting would authenticate the story in a way nothing else could. They sent it by courier, paid extra for speed and discretion, and then waited. 2 weeks later, the explosion came. The story broke in the London Sentinel, a cheap tabloid known for sensational headlines and questionable ethics. But the article wasn't sensational. It was meticulous, detailed, damning. Aristocratic murder plot exposed Duchess. Driven to suicide by corrupt physician and powerful lord. It named names: Greaves, Pemberton, Thomas. Laid out the conspiracy in brutal detail, quoted from Catherine's letter. Described the drugs found at Ashford Manor. Within days, every newspaper in London had picked up the story. The Times ran an editorial condemning the original inquest. Parliament was in an uproar. Pemberton issued a denial, threatened lawsuits, but the damage was done. Public opinion had turned. Henry sent a coded message. The inquest is proceeding. Pemberton's allies are abandoning him. You were right. Elara read the letter 3 times, barely daring to believe it. We did it, she whispered. Rowan pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. You did it, he corrected. This was your plan. Our plan. You're terrifying. You know that? She laughed, giddy and exhausted and relieved. I've been told. Volta. The trial came together faster than anyone expected. Pemberton was arrested, charged with conspiracy to commit murder. Thomas fled, disappeared somewhere into the continent, but his assets were frozen, his reputation destroyed. Mrs. Calloway turned herself in, testified against both of them. Her confession was damning, her guilt evident, but the judge showed mercy. She was sentenced to time served for her cooperation. The scandal consumed London for months. Investigations were launched into other suspicious deaths, other cases where women had been declared mad and locked away. Reforms were proposed. Laws were changed. It wasn't justice, not fully. Too many people escaped punishment. Too many victims would never get answers. But it was something, and for Elara, that was enough. They returned to England in the spring. The manor had been sealed during the investigation, but Henry arranged for it to be returned to Rowan once the trial concluded. They arrived on a gray morning, the cliffs shrouded in mist, the house looking smaller somehow, less menacing. Mrs. Calloway was gone, released but unwilling to return. The new staff Henry had hired were polite, efficient, strangers. Elara stood in the entrance hall, remembering the first time she'd walked through these doors. How desperate she'd been. How terrified. What are you thinking? Rowan asked. That I would have run if I'd known what was coming. Would you really? She considered. No, probably not. He smiled. We should sell this place. Too many ghosts. Or we could exorcise them. How? Elara turned to face the house, the corridors that had once felt like a prison. We make new memories, better ones. Turn it into something that helps people instead of hurting them. Like what? I don't know yet, but we'll figure it out. Rowan took her hand. Together? Together. They stood there, 2 people who'd married as strangers, survived as allies, and somewhere along the way become something more. The house was quiet now. No whispers, no footsteps, no shadows. Just light pouring through the windows, illuminating the dust and damage and possibility. And for the first time since Catherine's death, Rowan Ashford felt like he could breathe. The letter from Henry arrived a week later. Pemberton sentenced to 20 years. Thomas arrested in Brussels, awaiting extradition. The inquest officially exonerated you of any wrongdoing in Catherine's death. You're free. Elara read it aloud, her voice shaking. Free. She'd been fighting for so long, she'd almost forgotten what that word meant. Rowan pulled her close, pressed his forehead to hers. It's over. Is it? The legal part, yes. The rest. He pulled back, met her eyes. The rest is up to us. Elara nodded. There would be challenges ahead. rebuilding reputations, navigating society, figuring out what their marriage actually was now that survival wasn't the driving force. But they'd faced worse. And they'd won. Not perfectly. Not without scars. But they'd won. The first invitation arrived 3 weeks after Henry's letter. Elara stared at the cream-colored envelope, her name written in elegant script across the front. The Duke and Duchess of Ashford cordially invited. She turned it over, saw the seal. Lady Helena Barrington, one of London's most influential hostesses. "We're not going," Rowan said flatly, glancing at the invitation over her shoulder. "Why not?" "Because it's a trap. They want to parade us around like curiosities, see if we'll crack under scrutiny. Or they want to see if we're worthy of being let back in." Elara set the invitation on the table. "Either way, hiding here won't change anything. We fought to clear your name. Now we have to live with the aftermath. I don't care what society thinks. Maybe you should. These people have power. If we're going to rebuild, if we're going to turn this house into something useful, we need allies, not enemies." Rowan was quiet for a long moment, his jaw tight. Then he sighed. "You're not going to let this go, are you?" "No. You're the most stubborn person I've ever met." "You've mentioned that before." He almost smiled. "Fine. We'll go. But the moment someone crosses a line, we leave." Agreed. London felt different now. The city was the same, crowded, dirty, loud. But the weight of it had changed. Before, Elara had moved through these streets like a fugitive, always looking over her shoulder. Now, walking beside Rowan toward Lady Barrington's townhouse, she felt something closer to ownership, not of the city itself, but of her place in it. The ballroom was already packed when they arrived, a sea of silk and jewels and carefully arranged smiles. Conversation stopped the moment they were announced. The Duke and Duchess of Ashford. Every eye in the room turned. Elara's stomach clenched, but she kept her chin up, her expression calm. Rowan's hand tightened on her arm. Lady Barrington swept forward, a tall woman in her 60s with sharp eyes and a sharper tongue. "Your Graces, how lovely that you could join us." "Thank you for the invitation," Elara said. "I must admit I was surprised you accepted. After everything that's happened, I thought you might prefer to avoid society for a while longer." "We've been avoiding long enough." Lady Barrington's lips curved. "Indeed. Well, come in. There are people eager to meet you." She led them through the crowd, introducing them to lords and ladies and politicians, all of whom offered polite greetings with varying degrees of sincerity. Some were genuinely warm, people who'd followed the trial, who admired Elara's courage or sympathized with Rowan's ordeal. Others were cold, barely civil, clearly present only because refusing to acknowledge them would have been a social blunder. And then there were the vultures, the ones who smiled too wide, asked invasive questions disguised as concern, probed for weaknesses they could exploit later. "Tell me, Duchess," one woman said, her voice dripping false sweetness. "Was it terribly frightening, being hunted by Lord Pemberton?" Elara met her eyes without flinching. "It was clarifying." "Clarifying?" "It showed me exactly who could be trusted and who couldn't." The woman's smile froze. Rowan steered Elara away before the conversation could escalate. "You're making enemies." "I'm making statements. There's a difference." "Is there?" "Yes. Enemies are intentional. Statements are just truth delivered inconveniently." He laughed. A real laugh, the first she'd heard from him in weeks. "You're terrifying." "Good." They spent the next hour navigating the ballroom, deflecting barbs and accepting cautious overtures of friendship. It was exhausting, performative, everything Elara had despised about society before her father died. But it was also necessary. And then she saw him. Thomas Greaves. He stood near the refreshment table, thinner than she remembered, his face gaunt and pale. He was supposed to be awaiting extradition in Brussels. How was he here? Elara's breath caught. She grabbed Rowan's arm. "Look!" Rowan followed her gaze, his expression going hard. "That's impossible," Henry said. "I know what Henry said." They pushed through the crowd. Thomas saw them coming, set down his glass, and straightened. "Elara," he said, his voice calm. Too calm. "Rowan, I was hoping to see you." "You're supposed to be in custody," Rowan said. "I was. Then charges were dropped." Elara felt the floor tilt. What? Insufficient evidence, apparently. My solicitors argued that I was merely a client of Dr. Greaves, unaware of his activities. The magistrate agreed. Thomas's smile didn't reach his eyes. I'm a free man. That's not possible. You were part of the conspiracy. The letters were vague, suggestive perhaps, but not conclusive. And without Greaves to testify against me, well, dead men tell no tales. Elara's hands were shaking. You paid him to murder Catherine, to drive me mad. I paid him to provide medical care. What he did beyond that was his own choice. You're lying. Prove it. The challenge hung in the air. Elara wanted to hit him, wanted to scream, to drag him in front of everyone in this ballroom and force him to admit what he'd done. But she couldn't, because he was right. Without concrete proof, it was her word against his. And in the eyes of the law, he'd already been cleared. You won't get away with this, she said, her voice low. I already have. Thomas leaned closer. You fought hard, Elara. Exposed Pemberton, ruined his career, even managed to clear Ashford's name. Impressive. But you didn't win. Not completely. I'm still here, still free. And the estate you thought you'd saved? He smiled. The entailment was challenged during your absence. Contested by a distant cousin with better legal standing, you'll be receiving notice any day now. You're going to lose everything your father left behind. Elara's vision tunneled. Thomas straightened, brushing imaginary dust from his sleeve. Enjoy the party, niece. It may be the last one you attend. He walked away. Rowan caught Elara before her knees gave out. Breathe. He's taking the estate. We'll fight it. How? We barely have enough money to maintain Ashford Manor. Legal battles cost fortunes we don't have. Then we'll find another way. There is no other way. He's won. No. Rowan turned her to face him, his hands on her shoulders. He's gotten away with murder. That's not the same as winning. We're still here, still standing. That counts for something. Does it? Yes. Elara wanted to believe him, but the weight of Thomas's words pressed down on her like stones. They left the party early, rode back to their hotel in silence. Elara stared out the window, watching the city blur past, her mind racing. She'd fought so hard, risked everything, and Thomas was still free, still destroying lives, still walking away clean. It wasn't fair. But fairness, she was learning, had nothing to do with survival. Back in their room, Rowan poured 2 glasses of whiskey, handed her one. I have an idea, he said. Elara looked up. What kind of idea? The kind that's probably illegal and definitely dangerous. I'm listening. He sat beside her. Thomas is free because there's no proof linking him to the conspiracy. But that doesn't mean the proof doesn't exist. It just means we haven't found it yet. We gave everything to Pemberton. He destroyed it. Not everything. Mrs. Calloway testified that Thomas visited the manor multiple times, always when I wasn't there. That he met with Greaves privately, gave him instructions. She didn't have documentation, but she remembered dates, specific conversations. So if Thomas was coordinating with Greaves, he was careful, but careful people leave trails. Bank records, travel logs, correspondence. We find those, we have proof. We already tried. His study was empty. His London study, but he has an estate in Surrey. Smaller, less secure. If there's anything left, it'll be there. Elara stared at him. You want to break into his house? Again. I want to finish what we started. Rowan, if we're caught, we won't be. Thomas is in London. The estate will be empty. And if it's not, then we improvise. Elara drained her glass, felt the burn of the whiskey. She should say no. Should tell him this was insane, that they'd already risked enough. But she thought of Catherine, of Margaret before her, of every woman who'd been silenced, dismissed, erased because someone decided they were inconvenient. When do we leave? She asked. The Surrey estate was smaller than Elara expected. A modest manor house surrounded by overgrown gardens and a crumbling stone wall. They arrived at midnight, left the hired carriage a mile down the road, approached on foot. The house was dark, no lights in the windows. Stay close, Rowan whispered. They moved around the perimeter, checking doors and windows. Everything was locked. Then Elara spotted it, a servant's entrance half hidden by ivy, the lock old and rusted. Here, Rowan worked the lock with the same tools he'd used in London. It took longer this time, the mechanism stiffer, but eventually it clicked. They slipped inside. The house smelled of dust and neglect, like no one had been here in months. Elara pulled out the small lantern she'd brought, kept the light low. "Study's probably upstairs," Rowan said. They climbed carefully, testing each step for creaks. At the top, a corridor stretched into darkness, doors on either side. The third door opened into a study. Smaller than the London one, but just as meticulously organized. Desk, shelves, filing cabinets. "Start with the desk," Elara said. "I'll check the cabinets." They worked quickly, quietly, pulling out ledgers and letters and contracts. Most of it was mundane, estate management, investments, nothing relevant. And then Elara found it, a locked drawer at the back of the largest cabinet. She pried it open with a letter opener, her hands shaking. Inside, a ledger, dates, amounts, names. March 15th, payment to NG £200. Services rendered. April 3rd, payment to NG £150. Continued treatment. May 10th, payment to NG £300. Final arrangement. The entries went on. Dozens of payments, all to Greaves, all during the months leading up to Catherine's death. And at the bottom of the ledger, a note in Thomas's handwriting. "Ensure disposal is discreet. No loose ends." Elara's hands were shaking so hard she nearly dropped the ledger. "Rowan." He crossed to her, read over her shoulder. His face went white. "This is it," she breathed. "This proves he ordered Catherine's murder." "And yours." There were more entries, recent ones. January 12th, payment to NG, £500. New arrangement. EW, Elara, Whitcomb. He documented everything, Rowan said, his voice tight. Why would he be this stupid? Because he never thought anyone would find it. He's arrogant. Then let's use that against him. They gathered everything, the ledger, supporting documents, letters, stuffed them into a leather satchel Elara had brought. And then they heard it, footsteps downstairs. Elara's heart stopped. Someone's here. Impossible. The house was empty. A door slammed. Voices, low and urgent. He knew we'd come, Elara whispered. It's another trap. Rowan grabbed her hand. Shaz, backstairs, now. They ran. Down the corridor toward the servants' staircase at the rear of the house. Behind them, the voices grew louder, closer. Elara stumbled on the stairs, caught herself, kept moving. They burst out into the kitchen, sprinted for the door, and found it blocked. Two men stood there, both armed. Elara and Rowan skidded to a halt. Going somewhere? One of the men asked. Rowan stepped in front of Elara, shielding her. Let us pass. Can't do that. Mr. Greaves gave very specific instructions. Thomas isn't here. Doesn't need to be. We've got our orders. The second man raised his pistol. Elara's mind raced. They were cornered, outnumbered. If they tried to fight, they'd be killed, unless... She grabbed the lantern she'd been carrying, hurled it at the nearest man. It shattered against his chest, oil spraying across his coat. He screamed, stumbling back. Rowan lunged for the second man, grappling for the gun. Elara grabbed a cast-iron pan from the stove, swung it with all her strength. It connected with the first man's skull. He dropped. Rowan wrestled the pistol away from the second man, cracked him across the temple with the butt. He went down hard. They stood there gasping, surrounded by unconscious bodies. We need to go, Rowan said. Now! They ran. Out the door, across the gardens, over the wall. Didn't stop until they reached the carriage, threw themselves inside, shouted for the driver to move. The horses took off at a gallop. Elara clutched the satchel to her chest, her heart hammering. They'd done it. They had proof. And this time, Thomas wouldn't walk away. The trial was swift and brutal. Henry presented the ledger, the letters, the documented payments. Thomas's solicitors tried to argue fabrication, but the handwriting was verified, the accounts traced. The jury deliberated for less than an hour. Guilty. Conspiracy to commit murder, fraud, attempted murder. 25 years. Elara sat in the gallery watching as Thomas was led away in chains. He looked at her once, his face a mask of fury and disbelief. She didn't look away. This was justice, imperfect, delayed, hard-won, but justice. The estate was returned to Elara within the month. The cousin's claim was dismissed, the entailment upheld. She stood in her father's study, her study now, and felt the weight of it settle over her shoulders. She could sell it, live off the proceeds, never worry about money again. But that felt wrong, like giving up. Instead, she had a different idea. "What if we turned it into a school?" she said to Rowan one evening as they walked the grounds. He looked at her. "A school? For girls. Women, really. The ones who don't have options, who are being forced into marriages they don't want, or locked away by families who've decided they're inconvenient." She stopped, faced him. "We could teach them, give them skills, independence, a way out, like you gave me." Rowan was quiet for a long moment. Then he smiled. Catherine would have loved that. Would she? Yes. She was always talking about how unfair it was, the way women were treated, how little power we had. He paused. "I think she'd be proud of you." Elara's throat tightened. "I hope so." The school opened the following spring. They renovated the manor, turned empty rooms into classrooms and dormitories. Hired teachers, women mostly, ones who'd survived their own battles and wanted to help others do the same. The first students arrived in April. 12 girls, ages 16 to 23, all of them fleeing something. Elara met them in the entrance hall, the same place she'd stood years ago, desperate and terrified. "Welcome," she said. "You're safe here. Whatever brought you to us, whatever you're running from, it stops at these gates. This is your space now, your chance to build something new." One girl, no older than 17, raised her hand. "What if we can't? What if we're not strong enough?" Elara thought of Catherine, of Margaret, of herself, standing in the rain, staring up at Ashford Manor with no idea what was waiting inside. "You're already strong enough," she said. "You survived long enough to get here. That's the hardest part. Everything else, we'll figure out together." The years passed. The school grew. More students, more teachers, more success stories. Women who graduated and went on to start businesses, become governesses, marry for love instead of survival, or not marry at all. Elara and Rowan's marriage evolved too. What had started as a transaction, a desperate bargain, became something neither of them had expected. Partnership, respect, trust, and eventually quietly, love. Not the dramatic, all-consuming kind, the steady kind. The kind built on shared trauma and hard-won victories and late-night conversations about everything and nothing. One evening, 10 years after the school opened, Elara stood on the cliffs behind Ashford Manor, watching the sun set over the ocean. Rowan joined her, slipping an arm around her waist. "Thinking about Catherine?" he asked. "Always. She'd be proud, of what we've built." "I hope so." Elara leaned into him. "Do you ever regret it, taking the deal I offered?" "Which part? The marriage or the chaos that followed?" "Both," Rowan considered. "No, you terrified me at first, this reckless woman who walked into my house and turned my life upside down. But you also saved me. From grief, from guilt, from rotting away in this place." He kissed the top of her head. "I wouldn't change any of it. Not even the part where we almost died? Multiple times? Not even that." Elara smiled. They stood there as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of fire and gold. Behind them, the manor glowed with light and life. Voices drifted from the open windows, students laughing, debating, planning their futures. It wasn't perfect, but it was theirs, and it was enough. Years later, when Elara was old and gray, and her students had students of their own, someone asked her how she'd survived, how she'd faced down killers and conspiracies and systems designed to break her and come out the other side. She thought for a long moment. Then she said, "I stopped waiting for someone to save me, and I started saving myself." It was the simplest truth she knew, and the hardest one she'd ever learned, but it was the one that had set her free. And in the end, freedom was the only thing that mattered.